many of you raise your hand if you can circular breathe? Raise your hand if you can circular breathe. Raise your hand if you have no clue what that is. Okay, dope. Raise your hand if you want to be able to circular breathe. This is for you. So, I emailed everybody a handout, a copy of my handout. I'm going to refer to that a lot throughout my short presentation, 10 minutes.
Or 15.
15. Split the difference. So, I'm going to have actually Jonathan, Archangel, you're going to be my guinea pig. So if you can get your horn out whenever, I'll make it quick, I promise. I didn't tell him that he was doing this. So what is circular breathing? Circular breathing is the ability to breathe in while breathing out at the same time. A lot of people describe it that way, and I find that really problematic. When I was first learning how to circular breathe, I was like, breathing in and out at the same time, like, it's physically impossible. You can't do that. What I like to tell my students whenever I'm teaching this is it's actually breathing in while pushing cheek air out and breathing out at the same time. So there's a little diagram of what that looks like. So lung air is just what you do to breathe normally. The same air you would use to play the saxophone. So a lot of us grew up in Texas band, so a lot of us know I'll give you 2 counts, breathe in on 3 and 4, play, sort of thing. So I'm going to count 2, breathe in on 3 and 4, and I want everyone to blow out. So it looks like this. 1, 2. You did it anyway. Awesome. So that's lung air. That's something different than what we're going to do now, which is cheek air. When I was in elementary school, a lot of times you would have elementary teachers, when you would have little kindergartners go to like recess or lunch or something, and they want the kids to be quiet, they'll say, put bubbles in your mouth. Can I see everyone do that? Okay? So that's cheek air, being able to hold that in your mouth. My method is only 6 steps. I think, like a lot of extended techniques, it's not necessarily hard, it's just something new. Being able to store cheek air in your cheeks and being able to breathe is a new feeling. It's unnatural, but I don't like to teach things like this as it's a hard thing to do. I think everyone can do it for sure. So step 1 is to do the bubble, being able to go from just regular cheeks to full cheeks like that. Step 2 is to breathe normally while you maintain that bubble in your mouth. So if I can get everyone to have your bubbles in your mouth one more time, and try to breathe normally. Keep that air in your cheeks and breathe in and out normally. So it would look like this. Okay, raise your hand if you got it. Beautiful, all right. Step 3 is to squeeze the air out of your mouth, only using your cheek muscles. Think about spitting water, like if you were to have a glass of water, drink some, and spit out really, really slowly. It should look like that. Something that I like to do that helps me when I was first learning this technique is to actually use my hands to just push the air out. So go to your bubbles again, you would go, and then really fast, you would go, okay? So that's really fast. But oftentimes when we're circular breathing on the saxophone, it's a lot slower than that. So you can either, using your cheek muscles, make that sound slower, which sounds like, or, can everybody do that? And don't be discouraged if you're not able to blow that out with just using your cheek muscles. It's something that you're just gonna have to practice. Raise your hand if you got it. Okay, that's everybody so far. Everybody's with me. Step 3. Okay, step 4, while breathing in, push the air out, store it in your cheeks out. While breathing in, push the air stored in your cheeks out using your cheek muscles. For me, this is probably the hardest step. This is the one that took me the longest to learn. So while you're pushing the air out of your cheeks, take a deep breath in. And it would help if you blow the air out of your body already. So it would look like this. left hand if you got it. Your other left. Beautiful. Awesome. Okay, so y'all are fast learners. Look at us, UNT. So just like step 3, if you can't do it without your hands, you can feel free to use your hands. So if you can't go, feel free to use your hands. It's a helpful tool. Step 5 is, Jonathan, if you want to come on down. Everyone give a round of applause. I promise this is clean. And these straws, packaged. So this is probably the most common, have you ever done this before? Yeah. The water thing? Awesome. You want the wine glass or the cup? Wine. It's a trap. What are you, 19? Get out of here. So, this is probably the most common method when learning circular breathing. It's the water thing. I did this when I was a senior in high school, and I didn't get the concept quite, and I inhaled the water, which I choked. so for a long time, I went on this tirade about how circular breathing was bad, just because I was doing it. But this is a really cool technique, a really cool method, because you can actually see it. A lot of us are visual learners. You can also hear it. You can hear the bubbles going. So what you want to do, and I'll demonstrate first, and I'll have you do it. There's 2 methods for this. There's one with a cup of water, and there's another one that all of you can do right now. So method 1 is fill a glass cup up with water halfway. You don't want it too full, because if you're learning circular breathing for the first time, you'll make a mess. Practice blowing bubbles in the water with a straw. Make sure to pinch the straw a little bit to simulate mouthpiece resistance. So you don't want to just go free, with a straw, because our mouthpiece doesn't feel that way, right? Pinch the straw just a little bit, and I try to simulate the same resistance on my horn. So I play on fairly harder reeds, so I pinch the straw a lot, especially when I'm trying to do it on soprano. My soprano reeds are very hard. So keep that in mind. While you're pinching the straw, what I want you to do is practice steps 1 through 5 and going that way. So you're just blowing out, just your lung air. After that, you can combine some steps. You'll practice blowing air in your cheeks and blowing it back up. So you can go. If you can go back and forth between blowing your lung air out and just blowing up your cheeks, you're just blowing out. That's all you're doing. You can practice on the water. And then you would practice step 4, which is breathing in. So you would go. And theoretically, I can go whenever. The hardest step for me is 1, breathing in while blowing out, pushing the air out, not blowing out, excuse me, and sucking and switching over from your cheek air to your lung air blowing out. So when you're pushing your air out, what you can practice once your cheeks are like halfway empty, blow out lung air, if that makes sense. Can we try that actually? Sorry, I'll give you 1 second. So we're going to fill our cheeks with air, blow out, and as we're pushing the air out, once it's halfway done, not once if you're already touching your teeth with your fingers, it's too late. You can't circular breathe. So once your cheeks are halfway empty, switch over to your lung air and blow out that way. So it should sound like this. And it should be a constant stream of air. So if you combine all of that with a cup of water, it should look like this with my fabulous student, Jonathan. Something to note about Jonathan and the bubbles that he's making. They're all pretty consistent. It wasn't like a big splash of bubbles, and it wasn't too little of bubbles. They all sort of looked the same when he was blowing air out through his lungs and using the cheek air to push out. If the bubbles are consistent and you can see it that way, your tone when you're circular breathing is going to be consistent. So this is a really good method because you can actually see what your sound is going to sound like before you even play the saxophone. The second method is what I want everyone to do because you don't need water to do it. Put your finger in front of your mouth. That also simulates resistance of your mouthpiece. And try to practice steps 1 through 4. So you would blow out normally. Fill your cheeks with air. Push that air out. And after you're halfway done, breathe back in and go. So that would look like raise your hand if you got it. Raise your hand if you sort of got it. That's good. Don't give up. Raise your hand if you don't know at all. I will explain better. So, if you do want to know the people that did raise their hand that don't have it at all, you can contact me. I'm pretty sure my phone number is, or you can just email me actually, Rico Allen at my.unt.edu. So that's a method that you can use when you're in the car, when you're watching TV, when you're watching Netflix, before you practice. I really like this one. I used to do this a lot because you don't really need your horn to do this. You can do it whenever. And much like anything with music, the more you do it, the more comfortable you're going to get with it. Step 6 is to just practice on your instrument. So I start with the really easy tone. Oh, sorry. I start with something like in the middle of my register, so like a middle C. It's a pretty easy note to circular breathe on. And once you switch to saxophone, it tells you whether or not you're doing it right. So this is what it's going to sound like if it's wrong. Can anybody tell me why the sound cut off? Raise your hand high to the sky, not everybody all at once. Luke, what do you think?
You probably put too much pressure on breathing when you're trying to inhale from the cheeks to the air or something.
Yeah, so the number one problem that a lot of people do is when they're circular breathing, they bite down, up rather, on the mouthpiece, and you're cutting off the vibration for the reeds. So what you really want to do is stay as loose as possible. If anything, when I'm circular breathing, my embouchure is a little more loose than when I'm regularly playing the saxophone. Could you try any note you want and just try a long tone circular breathe?
I only have my jazz mouthpiece.
That's okay. Did you know Chris Potter can circular breathe? It's fact. So, you can notice that when he is circular breathing on a long tone, you can kind of hear when he's doing it, right? It gets a little quieter. This brings me to my next point. Here are some tips that help me. I tend not to, whenever I can, I try not to circular breathe on a held note because it's harder to hide it that way. When you're circular breathing, really good people that are really good at circular breathing do it without people noticing that they're doing it. So that's my biggest tip. I try to do it on like scales and stuff, so you won't be able to really tell. Right now, I'm playing the Crook Sonata, and the first movement of it at that bottom page, you got so that's all like scalular, right? I tend to circular breathe there because if I'm doing it right and I'm having a good sinus day, you won't be able to tell that I'm circular breathing. So fingers crossed. It's okay, right? I try to do it in smaller intervals. If I'm doing something with very, very large leaps, I try to breathe somewhere else. So if it's anything like sort of like an arpeggio or like octaves, I wouldn't dare, try to circular breathe with something like that because I know I'm just not good enough to do that. And it's not, a matter of fact if you're good at circular breathing or not. It's just being smart about, utilizing this technique. My biggest tip is to circular breathe before you need to breathe. So if you're playing a line and you're going and you're like, man, I really need to breathe, it's too late. You can't circular breathe. Because the first thing to engage that is having, air in your lungs to be able to circular breathe. So if you're running out, there's no way that you can, recycle air that's not there. Until circular breathing becomes second nature, mark where you will do it in your score. I write CB a lot. Sometimes I've been doing it for a while now, so now it's just sort of, I do it when I feel like it. My younger students, I make them not do it because, you have to learn how to phrase, and a lot of people learn to circular breathe really, really young, and they forget, I can just, not breathe ever, which is not how music works. Music needs pauses, and music needs commas and stuff like that. Let's see. Try to avoid circular breathing on bad sinus days. Trust me, I have really bad sinuses. If somebody's cutting the grass outside, I don't circular breathe. Because if I walk past it, I can't breathe, and it's just bad. So if you're feeling good, if your health is right, feel free to circular breathe. But if your nose is stopped up, then you're kind of done for, and you're shooting yourself in the foot. Circular breathing can help when you've packed too much air in your lungs. I tend to do this sometimes when I'm playing. It's not that I get nervous. I think I just breathe too much. I think I have to breathe more than I have to. So then you get to the point to where you're trying to blow air out, but you still have air in your lungs, and you're in this like endless cycle that seems like, oh man, will I ever be able to breathe again? To help me with that, I just circular breathe to get rid of that old air. And then I've broken the cycle. So that's a useful thing that I use circular breathing for. Experiment with circular breathing using different mouthpieces. When I first thought that I was good at circular breathing, I started on Barry. We were doing a saxophone ensemble at my previous school, and a lot of my stuff was just like these long notes for 32 measures, because they were written for like cello parts. And I was just like, well, let me see if I can do this. And for me personally, it's easier to circular breathe on a bigger mouthpiece, like Barry. It might have been because I play on softer reeds when I play Barry. For me personally, and it's different for everybody, soprano is the hardest to circular breathe on for me. It could be because my mouthpiece is really open and my reeds are really hard. So experiment. If you can't get it on alto, try tenor. If you can't get it on tenor, try Barry or soprano. Maybe soprano is easier for you than it is for me. And lastly, you do not need your horn to practice circular breathing. So that's probably, the coolest thing about this technique is that you can do it wherever you want, especially if you use step 5, the second method. You don't need a cup of water, you just need your hand and your ear. That's all you need. So are there any questions for me? Actually, before that, can we give a hand to Jonathan? Are there any questions for me about anything that I said, if it's confusing? If not, if you think of something later, just send me an email or go to my website that's down there, ricoallen.com. I just updated it. So thank you so much for your time.